Back in the 1970s and 80s, chimpanzees were in high demand at animal research laboratories. The problem was that adult chimpanzees are highly intelligent and quite strong, and therefore very difficult to catch when they are in their natural environment. And so the catchers decided it would be easier to kill the mothers and then snatch the babies. Many, many, many chimpanzees were orphaned and taken from the wild in this way. They were brought to different facilities, and some of them were caged up in the basement in the dark, isolated, with very little interaction from either humans or fellow chimpanzees. Some of them were forced to mate. Some of them were poked and prodded. And usually, most of them were kept in cages that were much too small and forced to undergo any number of experiments. All was the case for a group of chimpanzees that were brought to a laboratory in Vienna, Austria. Then, in the late 90s, there was a company buyout, and the chimpanzees no longer had to undergo any of these experiments. The problem was, because of their experiences, they could not be released back into the wild. And because of their lack of socialization, they couldn't be put in at zoos with other chimpanzees. There wasn't much to do with them for a long time. Finally, in 2011, the 37 remaining chimpanzees were brought to a sanctuary in Austria that was built specially for them. There were 3 separate housings for them, indoors and then outdoors. There was an enclosure that was 2,000 square meters, complete with trees and ponds and climbing structures. Some of these chimpanzees had been in captivity for over 30 years. Some had been born into captivity. So when they were brought there and the doors were open, none of them went bounding out into this new freedom. Instead, they stayed in the door, peeking, standing on top of each other, feeling safety in numbers. A few of them might have had memory flashbacks from when they were babies and they were out in the nature. But for some of them, this would be the first time they would ever see clouds, or butterflies, or feel the breeze on their face. So it took some time for any of them to be brave enough where some ran out a few steps and then ran right back in. Eventually, they moved out into this new area, though it took a couple of them over a month to be courageous enough. Now they are all acclimated, and they have found new roles in this community. Some of them find themselves up on top of the highest tree, serving as lookout. Some seem to spend a lot of time at the pond, maybe fishing. There's a couple who are entertained by interacting with human visitors. And then there are several who just like to bask in the sun all day. Can you blame them? You know, I never would have thought of sunshine and fresh air as being a scary thing. But it can be. Not just for animals, but for humans, for anyone who has spent much time in captivity. In John's Gospel that we read today, we heard about how after the crucifixion, the 11 remaining disciples were held captive to their own fear. John tells us that first Easter morning that Mary Magdalene encountered the resurrected Jesus. And then she ran and shared the good news with the other disciples. And it seemed to have little to no effect on them, because they remained in the house they were staying, with the doors locked and the windows closed, hiding, afraid that the same Jewish leaders who had conspired to put Jesus to death would come after them next. Later that evening, whispering in the dark in their hiding place, Jesus appeared to the disciples, bringing them peace, breathing on them the Holy Spirit, and instructing them that just as God had sent him, now Jesus was sending them out into the world to share the good news. Their cages had been opened. There was sunshine and fresh air, adventure and mission awaiting them all. They had a job to do. And they stayed exactly where they were and did nothing, hiding. A week later, we hear the disciples were still stuck, frozen in fear. They had seen Jesus, they had rejoiced, but they couldn't move. And so Jesus appeared to them all a second time, to this group who had been with him, who had been at his side when he healed people who were sick, when he gave sight to the blind, when he fed the hungry. This time, Thomas was there. Thomas had heard the stories from his friends, and he wanted to believe, but he needed to be certain. He needed to be sure. How could he know this was truly Jesus? And so Jesus showed Thomas his scars, his wounds, because that was what Thomas needed to know this was real. For Thomas, it wasn't just about Jesus being resurrected. It was the wounded Lord that was necessary to meet the needs of God's people. And when Thomas saw the scars, Thomas was then the first to get down on his knees and to confess that Jesus is his Lord and his God. Thomas, the confessor, is believed to live out his belief as the verb that it is, an action word, not just a feeling. He is thought to have most likely traveled farther than any of the original 12 in sharing the good news. You see, our faith is not just something heads, in our minds, or even in our hearts. It's how we live our life. If we believe in the risen Christ, if we confess Jesus to be our Lord and our God, but others cannot tell by the way we live our lives, what good is that? We are like an animal thinking that we are still trapped when the gate is wide open. Jesus returned and sent the disciples out, and Jesus sends us out. Because of the resurrection, we are no longer captive to our fear. Our empty places have been filled, our brokenness healed. When the stone was rolled away, our cage was lifted. And now we may feel the Spirit blowing past us, and the sunshine is blinding. Because now it is time to go. Now it is time to love one another as Christ loves us, and to share this good news, to follow where God is calling, and to live as children of God.